Those are the lucky ones, because there are diplomats who now believe up to 2,000 people have died in the crackdown on anti-government protesters inside Libya. The United Nations voting unanimously in Security Council to impose sanctions on Colonel Gaddafi's regime. The UN resolution demands an end to the violence in Libya and recognition of the people's legitimate demands. It also calls for an investigation into the bloodshed and for attacks on civilians to be referred to the International Criminal Court. Add to that an end to all arms sales to Libya. But the UN Secretary-General says it won't stop there.
I commend the Security Council for its decisive action today. In the days ahead, we will look for similarly decisive steps from the UN General Assembly and the international community as a whole. Today's measures are tough. In the coming days, if needed, even bolder action may become necessary.
Australia's moved to put pressure on the Libyan government by imposing unilateral sanctions. The country's Foreign Minister, Kevin Rudd, told AlJazeera that more measures do need to be taken against Gaddafi and his regime.
The actual teeth of this UN Security Council resolution are quite sharp. Firstly, in terms of the targeted sanctions against members of the regime, this is very important. The Gaddafi family has significant financial assets invested around the world, including in the United Kingdom and elsewhere. This, therefore, affects directly personal financial interests. Secondly, an arms embargo is necessary in order to prevent the further resupply of military equipment to those military units remaining supportive of Gaddafi. And thirdly, the criminal court reference is important. It's only the second time in the history of the UN this has been done. It's not so much that Gaddafi himself may take notice of this, but those underneath him must realise that in executing any command to take violent action against civilians, these people who have pulled triggers will be brought to justice as well.
Let me stop you there if I could for a moment, and just forgive me for interrupting, but the point remains that the fact is that Gaddafi has, for 40 years now, more or less snubbed his nose at the international community anyway. These threats, these sanctions will mean nothing to him, particularly since he's already vowed to die a martyr in Libya should the need arise. So my question remains, in between the time that these sanctions that you say are not toothless, they're very sharp-toothed, when they actually have an effect on the country in some sense, in between that time and now, there could still be enormous bloodshed. What is the international community going to do if he uses the arms he already has against his own people and starts causing some serious bloodshed?
Well, the first thing I'd say also is that you said that Gaddafi himself may be contemptuous of these measures. Those underneath him who take his commands may actually be attentive to these measures, because that is the whole purpose of the International Criminal Court. However, I also believe that further action needs to be taken by the Council. You mentioned before the desirability of no-fly zones over Libya. We in Australia fully support that course of action. In my own correspondence with the President of the Security Council, I have said that Australia fully supports the imposition of no-fly zones within Libya itself.
Well, that was Kevin Rudd, former Prime Minister of Australia, now the country's Foreign Minister. And one of the reasons world leaders can be more outspoken now is that many of their people, most of their people, are outside Libya. They've managed to leave. The evacuation from that country, though, has been far from easy. Dan Nolan has the details of just one of them, a mission by the British military.
Relieved British oil workers arrive in Malta after being rescued from Libya in a secret military operation. 2 British Air Force C-130 Hercules planes are believed to have entered Libyan airspace without permission, landing in the desert south of Benghazi. The British government won't reveal exact locations, but media reports suggest airfields at Nafura and Amal were used to collect around 150 stranded British oil workers before flying them to safety in Malta.
There was scheduled to be 65, but in the end there was about 130 got on.
Really?
Yeah. And we were sitting in the aisles. It's very cramped, but we were just glad to be out of there and getting on the flights.
The British government has faced criticism for not doing enough to rescue its nationals, particularly those cut off from the port cities of Tripoli and Benghazi, where Navy ships can be used. More air missions will be required, with hundreds more British oil workers still stranded in the south.
As I said, there's still people in the desert, so I can't say too much. I can't say where I came from, etc., etc. Because the guys down there are still doing an excellent job to gather all the guys together and get them evacuated.
With most of their workers being evacuated, Libya's oil facilities are pumping just a trickle, some reduced to 10% of full capacity. Dan Nolan, Al Jazeera.
In Oman, security officials say at least 2 people have been shot dead by police. Rubber bullets and tear gas were used on demonstrators in the industrial city of Sohar. Witnesses say at least 1,000 people gathered demanding political reform. The military is now moving in to secure the area. The political activist and writer Basma al-Raji is in the capital Muscat, where protests have also been taking place.
At this time now we are standing in front of the Shura Council, where there is a sit-in protesting for the violence that has taken place against protesters in the Sohar state. In fact, what has happened, there were marches and demonstrations in various parts of the country from January and last few days on February 18th, demanding reforms and government changes of cabinet members. And some of the demonstrators, started yesterday in the eastern part of the country, southeast of the country, in the Sur district, as well as in Al-Batina area, which is Sohar district, and that's the main city there, the local capital.
In Bahrain, protesters are getting together for another opposition march on Sunday, and thousands of people also turning out at a rally in the capital on Saturday night to hear one of the country's opposition leaders. Hasham Mushaima is the head of the Shia opposition group Haq. He returned to the country on Saturday after several months in exile. Meanwhile, in Yemen, opposition parties say they will join protests trying to bring down their president. Sunday's announcement comes following a series of anti-government demonstrations in Sana'a, the latest attracting hundreds of thousands of people. At a meeting with senior military officers on Saturday, the president, Ali Abdullah Saleh, was defiant.
The army and security forces have vowed to defend the republican system, the unity and the safety of the republic, until the last drop of our blood. This vow stands now. There is an attempt to split the country into north and south. We see the flags of the secessionists raised in many cities in the south on different occasions, and we see the flag of the Imam that portrays a sword and 5 stars, ready to be raised in northern provinces. There is a conspiracy against the security and safety of the nation. It is a big lie that there's a difference between us and the opposition. There are people riding the wave of change and have no idea which direction the nation is moving. It's just stubbornness and arrogance on their part. Had they had legitimate demands, we would have listened to them. I have offered a series of concessions.
Well, what next for Gaddafi? As the opposition continues to gain ground in Libya, the leader's options look increasingly limited. We'll take a look at what they are. And
I'm Rob Reynolds in Hollywood, where it's Oscar time again. Coming up, we'll have a look at this year's crop of Academy Award nominees.
Hello again. In the northern parts of India, we've got quite a bit of snow at the moment, and there's more still to come. If we take a look at the satellite picture, we can see this speckled area of cloud here making its way across parts of Pakistan and Afghanistan, and that's going to be turning heavier, I think, as we head through the next day or so. So lots of snow there that'll also be making its way into the northern parts of India. Now, the tail end of this system is also what's affecting us here in Doha. So we're seeing a little bit of grey weather at times, but it's still rather hot and humid. Our temperatures then getting up to 26 degrees, but there's still likely to be some cloud around as we head through Monday. To the north of us, well, the winds are generally feeding up from the south, a warm direction then, so 25 degrees in both Kuwait and Baghdad will be rather sticky, and that's 77 in Fahrenheit. Meanwhile, though, further west, here's that area of rain that's been making its way across Turkey. Heavy downpours out of that and still dangling its feet further south, so wet weather as well through parts of Syria and into parts of Lebanon as well. Up towards Europe, and the wettest weather here at the moment is in the Mediterranean. Heavy downpours, strong winds out of this. In the east, it's generally a lot quieter here, but it certainly is cold. As a top temperature in Moscow, we're looking at -12 degrees. The western parts are milder, but still rather grey there in London at 5 degrees.
Rhythms of resistance.
A part of the struggle, and popular resistance is art. Through my art, I resist. Resistance is my art, and my art is my war.
Musicians using music as a way to maintain their cultural identity.
I believe that when I sing to the world, I portray Palestine through my voice, my singing, and my songs.
Songs from the lost homeland. At this time, on Al Jazeera.
David Foster with you on Al Jazeera, updating the top stories this hour. Reports suggest that Libya's third largest city, Misrata, is now in the hands of the opposition. As is AlJazeera. According to witnesses, tanks are moving towards Misrata. It means the uprising is getting closer to the capital, Tripoli, with some protesters threatening to march to there. The UN Security Council has voted unanimously for sanctions against Libya's leader, Colonel Gaddafi, and his inner circle. This includes travel bans, an assets freeze, and an arms embargo. With violence spreading, the humanitarian situation is said to be getting worse. Governments around the world are sending food and medical aid. Many countries still trying to get their citizens out of Libya. Now, the ring around Gaddafi does appear to be tightening. Al Jazeera's Lawrence Lee takes a look at the embattled leader's options from here on in.
So what next for Gaddafi? Assuming he will not go voluntarily, his next moves must surely be predicated on where he believes he still has support and to what extent he can block his opponents from marching against him. A look at Western Libya presents problems for both the opposition fighters and for Gaddafi. The coastal road from the east is blocked at Sirte, Gaddafi's hometown, which he still controls. It's not a big place, but the roads either side of it are said to be controlled by armed forces loyal to Gaddafi. As such, it presents the biggest obstacle to forces from the east moving on Tripoli. Yet west of Sirte and still east of Tripoli, the rebels are said to now hold Misrata.